Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Friday, June 9th, 2017. Your humble host has been on jury duty most of this week, and I am free at last and free to discuss the case. I'll give you a rundown on my jury duty experience right at the end of this podcast today. And the jury schedule did kind of cause problems for me in producing podcasts this week. It's behind us, and so our regular schedules will continue. I'm not doing a Facebook Live video feed today. I didn't have enough time to plan and execute it, but we plan to resume that next Friday. And the schedule of the court did allow me to watch almost all of James Comey's testimony yesterday before the Senate Intelligence Panel. And I have to say that he revealed that the emperor has no clothes, but he was unable to deliver a fatal blow to the emperor, at least at this time. And in reaction, Comey is being tagged as a leaker by the Trump aggressive lawyer and other surrogates. And so it's created a new diversion from the fact-free Trump-Russia scandal. Nevertheless, Comey did manage to assert once again, without offering any public proof, that Russia did interfere in our election last year, and so we are stuck with that narrative at this time. But I have a few notes I want to pass along to you here. First of all, as you know, I don't consider James Comey to be a saint. I have sharp criticism of his management of the FBI. And some of it relates to Hillary Clinton's email investigation, some the failure to disclose that Trump and allies were under investigation before the election. And also there are a myriad of other issues related to his conduct in the San Bernardino case, the use of paid FBI informants in Muslim stings in this country, frame-ups of people declared to be a threat as domestic terrorist actors who, in fact, are framed. And so, as regular listeners know, I'm not the president of the Jim Comey fan club. And we knew from the advance statement that was pre-released, it wasn't actually leaked, the day before his testimony, that the phrase that he quotes Trump as using in the February 14th one-on-one meeting in the Oval Office after other people had been shooed out by Trump, well, it is the work of a clever extortionist. Because Trump used a phrase, I hope you can let this go. I hope you will let Flynn go. But as one of the defenders of Trump, the many Republicans, some of whom we thought might, part company with their embattled president, but they all lined up to say, well, this just shows that hoping for something to happen is not the same as a directive. Now, Comey said, given that it was a one-on-one meeting, that this is the President of the United States, he took it as a directive, that that's what Trump wanted him to do. He said, I didn't follow up on it, but that's what he was trying to communicate to me. And Senator Feinstein from here in California leveled a simple but important question that I had raised before Comey's testimony. She said, why didn't you tell the president this is wrong? We can't talk about this. And Comey had a pretty lame answer. He said it was a good question, that if he had been more courageous, blah, blah, blah. But this wasn't the first time that he had dealt with Trump. There was the first meeting in January where he shared the dodgy dossier. Then there was the dinner at the White House on January 27th, where loyalty was demanded. So Comey should have been much better prepared. Given his position, given the fact that he was taking notes about his interactions with Trump because he was afraid that Trump would lie, he leveled the term liar to Trump in the White House for the way Trump had criticized the FBI as having low morale and poor leadership. And Comey also used the word lie when it came to responding to questions about why he thought he had been fired. He also raised the question about Attorney General Loretta Lynch, the meeting with Bill Clinton on their airplanes in Phoenix, and that Lynch had instructed Comey not to refer to the Hillary Clinton investigation as an investigation, but to refer to it as a matter. And this is more important than I think some media commentators have signaled. And that is that here was Lynch carrying water for the Clinton campaign, because there we're carefully describing the whole thing not as an inquiry, not as an investigation, not as a criminal issue, but simply as a matter. And Comey took that as a signal that he was supposed to get on board, to get on message with the political framing of the Democratic candidate for president. And so I think his wariness about that, his concerns that Loretta Lynch was compromised by her connection to Democrats and to the Clintons, I think those were very real factors. And I think that was an interesting angle that he described. Now, this idea of him being tagged as a leaker is interesting because it came from his own admissions. He told Senator Collins from Maine that, yes, I had shared a copy of some of my notes from the Trump conversations with a friend who is a law professor at Columbia University, and I asked him to distribute it to the media, which is leaking, rather than do it myself, said Comey. And he didn't actually name who it was, but it has been confirmed that his name is Daniel Richman. He confirmed that to the New York Times. Now, this is an opening that the Trump team, led by a criminal attorney who has very sharp elbows, Mark Kasowitz, and he is going hard on this, saying he's going to file a complaint with the Justice Department Inspector General that he might claim that Comey stole these documents and misused them. And he is using the information that Comey confirmed as he was questioned by senators, that on 3 different occasions he did reassure Trump that Trump was not personally under investigation at that time. And that's what Trump and his team are seizing on, trying to feed the base, the Twitter bots, with the information that this is vindication. Now, as I said, Comey exposed the naked emperor. He did not slay him or, find a means to ease him out of his position. But for Trump to claim that this is vindication, well, that's just bullshit. But it works with the people who are predisposed to believe that Trump is a victim of a witch hunt, and that these evil liberal Democrats are using nefarious means to try to bring him down. And as I mentioned, the Republicans in the Senate, unsurprisingly but sadly, really were quite partisan. Marco Rubio, who had signaled that he might ask some tough questions of Comey that would hurt Trump, oh no, he was on board, using Comey's testimony to say, well, the president didn't actually order you to curtail or eliminate the investigation into Mike Flynn. He just said he hoped you would. And so the partisan divide is as evident as at any time. Here's a quote from the Times coverage. Republicans said they discerned no damning disclosures or other disturbing revelations that would lead them to abandon Trump. They pointed to Comey's confirmation that he had told Trump that he wasn't a subject of any investigation. And if anything, the Republicans decided that the linkage of the acknowledged leak with Comey's unhelpful statement, maybe it was honest, but it certainly didn't help his cause. He said that after Trump tweeted about the possibility of recordings of their conversations, that Comey said, wow, I've got these memos that I wrote. He said he woke up in the middle of the night 3 days later. And then he added that he had his friend deliver them to the media, leak them, in an effort to put on more pressure for a special counsel. Now, that is a political motivation that really moves Comey out of the victim of an improper termination by Trump for nefarious reasons such as obstruction of justice, and it gives them a weapon to use to undermine the independence and credibility of Comey and turn him into a disgruntled former employee. And I think that was a real setback for those who believe that Comey was going to deliver some kind of coup de grace. Coup de grace is the way they say it in a Steely Dan song. Interestingly, David Brooks, Republican op-ed columnist at the New York Times, still a Trump opponent. He goes through the litany of, how we got to where we are. And he says the upshot is the Trump administration will probably not be brought down by outside forces. It will be incapacitated from within by the bile, rage, and backstabbing that are already at record levels in the White House staff, by the dueling betrayals of the intimates Trump abuses so wretchedly. And although there may be no serious collusion with the Russians, there is now certain to be a wide-ranging independent investigation into all things Trump. And I think that's accurate. In my own opinion, having been through Watergate as a young reporter, having experienced the attempt to impeach Bill Clinton, he was impeached, but he wasn't removed from office. Obstruction of justice is something that many people think appears and can be seen as obvious. But getting to impeachment requires 2/3 votes in both of the houses. And as long as Republicans are content to allow Trump to create this big distraction that may take him down, but they think won't harm them personally, they're busy, and we'll get to that in a moment, taking odious actions that you and I are, outraged about, but we are sufficiently diverted to this whole Trump, Russia, and now the Comey testimony. So this is a fascinating sequence of events. I know that many people hoped that it was going to really, land some kind of a devastating body blow or fatal blow, but it hasn't. And it shows that this is going to be a long and arduous process. And will John McCain make it? My note to self was that the hearing occurred before lunchtime, but Senator McCain from Arizona was already well out to lunch. And in his convoluted and confusing testimony, at one point, Comey had to say, I'm confused, Senator. What the hell are you talking about? And he was trying to create an equivalence between the Hillary Clinton email investigation and the investigation of Trump associates that began with the FISA court actions last July and that Comey never disclosed until well after Trump was sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And it was a pretty inane question because the two investigations started at different times, very different frameworks, and I think that McCain just looked old and out of it. Meanwhile, we have seen the president tweeting this morning about his vindication because he's not personally under investigation, or at least he wasn't when he fired Comey a month ago. But his team is having trouble keeping up with the Twitter fingers. And this has happened time and again. On the original idea of firing Comey, he put out the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General with a memo saying that Comey was fired over the Clinton email investigation. And then the next day, Trump steps all over it with the visit from the Russians telling them that he fired Comey because of the investigation into alleged Russian influence. So it's happening again. Yesterday, Paul Ryan defended Trump, saying that he's new and inexperienced. The president's new at this. He's new to government. He probably wasn't steeped in the long-running protocols that establish the relationships between justice, FBI, and the White House. He's just new to this. Well, then on Friday, Trump tweeted a link to a Fox News article quoting Alan Dershowitz, the cutthroat lawyer from Harvard, who's quoted as saying the president has the authority to direct the head of the FBI to stop investigating anyone. I think this puts an end to any claim that President Trump obstructed justice. You can't obstruct justice by simply exercising your power under the Constitution. And a Washington Post writer asks, which is it? Trump's top lawyer says the president didn't ask Comey to lay off Flynn. Ryan seems to be saying that Trump did, but he didn't know any better. And Trump appears to be endorsing the explanation that he was within his rights to tell Comey to let Flynn go. Well, that's not only confusing, but as I pointed out earlier, I don't think that Trump is an amateur when it comes to extortion, when it comes to intimidation tactics, when it comes to squeezing people. And so I don't buy Paul Ryan's argument at all. Now, here's another example. Kasowitz is making an argument that Trump never asked for Comey's loyalty, and a second argument that Trump is entitled to Comey's loyalty. Then Corey Lewandowski, who has returned to the fold to help manage this crisis, he said what the president asked for was loyalty to the country, loyalty to make sure that the American people have the justice system they want. Oh, yeah, Corey. And the article says, again, Team Trump can't get its story straight. Kasowitz is saying Trump did not demand loyalty, but it would be totally fine if he did. Lewandowski is saying Trump did demand loyalty, but meant allegiance to the country. Every day I like to pause for a minute and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Michael Petty just renewed his annual subscription. Mark Brodsky in Northern Illinois is a longtime supporter. Billy Cook up in Eureka is a friend and benefactor. And then there's Dick Atlee out in Maine. We've got the whole nation covered with people who support me, and I'd like you to join their ranks. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu button, then you click on Become a Subscriber, pull it down, takes you to the sign-up page, and you can choose from the options the level of support that is financially comfortable for you. And I appreciate your subscription help. So here's a very interesting question posed by Philip Bump at the Washington Post today. It's considered an analytical piece. And it raises the question, if Mark Kasowitz follows up on his threats and files legal actions against Jim Comey for releasing the notes of his conversation with the president, either to the Senate yesterday or when it was leaked by his friend from Columbia University, this could place Jim Comey in the position of a whistleblower, and he may be entitled to protections of the law as somebody who blew the whistle. So the writer at the Post contacted Stephen Cohn, K-O-H-N. He's been a guest on this podcast several times. He and his brother run a whistleblower-defending law firm in Washington, D.C. Cohn said that what Kasowitz is doing is frivolous grandstanding. First of all, I don't believe the Inspector General would have jurisdiction over Comey. He's no longer a federal employee. But second, he said, initiating an investigation because you don't like somebody's testimony could be considered obstruction. And in the whistleblower context, it's both evidence of retaliation and under some laws could be an adverse retaliatory act itself. So Cohn believes that what Comey described about sharing that memo with a friend who then leaked it to the New York Times is not a crime. He said, obviously, you can report on a conversation with the president. What the president does isn't confidential or classified. And if the information was in fact classified, that could complicate the picture here. But Cohn says the constitutional right to go to the press with information on matters of public concern, as long as you're not doing it in a way that will bring out classified information, the reason why that's protected constitutionally is that the courts, up to and including the Supreme Court, have ruled that the public has a constitutional right to hear this information. In other words, it is constitutionally protected speech. And the article was updated after comments from Tom Devine, who is the legal director at the whistleblower group, the Government Accountability Project, and he noted that Comey himself isn't covered by the Whistleblower Protection Act because he is a presidential appointee and a representative of the FBI, which is not covered by the act. but he does cite Code Title 18, Section 1513, that bans retaliation. While most of the nation and the Beltway press were consumed by the Comey show, the Republicans in the House yesterday, at the very same time this was going on, passed by a vote of 233 to 186, a measure that will scuttle the DoddFrank financial law that was passed after the meltdown of 2008. And the bullshit that they use to promote this is astounding. Paul Ryan, the speaker, says, well, this is because our community banks are in trouble. Well, if there's an element of Dodd-Frank that's causing trouble for community banks, fix that element. But we know that by essentially repealing it, the major beneficiaries will be the big banks, the too-big-to-fail banks, the investment banks on Wall Street. And the critical part that is repealed is the rule that bans banks from engaging in trading for their own profit using federally insured deposits. That is the old firewall from the repealed Glass-Steagall law that was the legacy of the Depression of the 1930s. And there are also rollbacks of rules that are intended to protect investors from unscrupulous investment advisors. And it will also eliminate restrictions on payday loan companies. And so any one of these pieces, and for example, I know mortgage people who write mortgages, mortgage brokers, that's what they're called. And they do complain that there are elements of Dodd-Frank that require excess paperwork, and they therefore don't support it. But like I said, these elements can be repealed or repaired without undermining the general thrust of the Act and without eliminating the Consumer Protection Board. But under the guise of rescuing community banks, this really bad bill has cleared the House and will be heading for the Senate, where its future is uncertain. Also, Kevin Gosztola over at Shadowproof made a list in his column yesterday of other stories that have been buried by the Comey show this week. For example, his replacement, Christopher Wray, who worked for Chris Christie to help defend him from the Bridgegate scandal. Well, he was also involved in decision-making related to torture. He helped Chiquita Banana executives avoid material support charges for supporting Colombian terrorists when he was the Assistant Attorney General. And he also provided inappropriate briefings to Attorney General John Ashcroft during the investigation into the Valerie Plame leak. There are other issues, for example. I mentioned what's going on in the House while Comey was testifying. Over on the Senate side, they were busy with secret meetings of Republicans only, hoping to hammer out a deal that could get the mere 50 votes needed to pass an Obamacare repeal in the Senate. And this is really, really dangerous because these actions are going on out of plain sight. And there's a lot of damage that is being done by the wrecking crew, while so many Democrats are stoking this whole Trump-Russia thing, hoping that it will cause somebody to hit the eject button and bounce Trump out of Washington. There's also an odious bill that got support from 137 Democrats in the House who voted with Republicans to pass legislation that could subject teenagers to federal mandatory minimum sentences of 15 years or more for simply attempting to sext with another minor. And there are surveys that show that sexting is, for whatever reason, quite popular among teenagers. And to turn this into a minimum mandatory sentence of 15 years, that is really dangerous. And Gosztola lists some of the Democrats who voted for it: Nancy Pelosi, Tulsi Gabbard, Ted Lieu, Jamie Raskin, Adam Schiff, and Nydia Velázquez. And Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat from Texas, had an amendment which sought to ensure that minors aren't punished as sex offenders. That amendment was defeated. So this is what happens when we have these Trump sideshows going on. The other one that's kind of off the radar is this squabble that has started between the Gulf dictators. The members of the Gulf Cooperation Council have turned on Qatar, which is one of the Emirati dictatorships there. And this is driven familiarly by hacks and leaks. The allegation is that hackers planted fake news information that embarrassed the Emir of Qatar. This then was promoted and published by Saudi and other media outlets in the United Arab Emirates. We're told that this fake news was created by Russian hackers who are independent of the government. I don't know how that has been determined. But Trump is meddling in this instead of trying to broker a resolution, which Rexon Tillerson, who plays Secretary of State, is attempting to do. Trump is making it clear that he's siding with the Saudis against the Qataris. And he seems oblivious to that important military base in Qatar, which is where he launches attacks in Syria and Iraq these days. In Britain, the snap election that was called 3 years early by Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May has backfired. She thought that she was going to get a mandate to increase her majority in the Parliament to enable the passage of the Brexit negotiations with greater ease. And instead, Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party delivered an upset, not enough to take control. They came very close to that. It was a 10% increase in support of Labour, and the edge came from younger voters, people aged 20 to 35. The turnout among those millennial voters was almost double recent elections and came as quite a shock. Theresa May is expected to form a minority government with the help of a minor party from Scotland or Northern England and try to limp forward, but it's certainly going to be a major setback. I don't ordinarily watch the morning TV shows, Good Morning America, and that stuff. I prefer to read newspapers to get my daily jolt in the morning. But our newspaper carrier was late today, and so as I ate breakfast, I was watching Good Morning America, and there was an interview with Chelsea Manning, conducted by Juju Chang. And I thought it was pretty interesting. It's an excerpt from a longer piece that's going to air on Nightline, I think, in about a week. But I have to say that it was really refreshing to hear Chelsea Manning speak, because after all these years where we have seen first Bradley and then Chelsea, only in photographs with never a word uttered, we've seen her writings at The Guardian and elsewhere. But it was really interesting just to hear her speak, and she's looking more feminine. She was wearing a dress and had a kind of cute pixie haircut. But I thought she was remarkably honest, and I was glad to see her just be herself. And it's got to be difficult after what she's been through, and she knows that when she walks down the street, if she does, that half of the people think that she's a traitor, and many others aren't sure. Only a small group of us are staunch supporters of her right to leak and proud of the work that she did. At any rate, the next Chelsea Manning, of course, is reality winner, and she's got a tough uphill struggle because we know that the government has already gotten some sort of a confession out of her. They have tracked, with some help from the Intercept reporter Matt Cole and perhaps others there, they were helped in tracking her down. And so it's a pretty open and shut case, and despite that, the prosecutor is dumping dirt to the media, hinting this was not the first time the defendant mishandled classified information, but we're not told what other event might have occurred. And also, reality winner doesn't appear to know that when she calls her family from jail, that those calls are monitored, because we get a quote from a call to her mom where she says, I screwed up. There's another call, I think, to a sibling where she says she's going to play the cute white blonde girl routine. That certainly doesn't help. But the prosecutor in the case, her name is Solari. She also said that notebooks that Reality Winner kept included references to the Taliban and to Osama bin Laden. In one note, Ms. Winner allegedly wrote, I want to burn the White House down. Now, this reminds me of the way John Ashcroft convicted people like Jose Padilla and John Walker Lind in the media before they ever went to trial. And that's what we're seeing here. In the show file for today's podcast, I'm linking to a really important investigative report that was just released the other day by Robert Perry at consortiumnews.com. And it is based on the work of Professor Ted Postal. He is a professor emeritus at MIT and an expert on chemical weapons and on missile defense systems. I've had the pleasure of talking with Professor Postal on many occasions over the years, and I find him highly credible. In fact, I've never found anything that he has said or reported to be inaccurate. And Robert Perry details the work of Ted Postal in deconstructing the claims issued by the White House and embraced by a sequence of reports in the New York Times. And these are related to the April 4th incident in Khan Shaykhun, Syria, where we are told a chemical weapon was discharged. But where that weapon came from, how it got there, how it was detonated, the credibility of the video footage that we have been shown to support the contention that this was the responsibility of the Syrian government, when their motives would move them in the exact opposite direction at that time, I think these are stunning issues. And when you look at the work of Professor Postal, he looked at wind conditions that contradict the claims of how the sarin gas would have moved from its detonation point to the populated areas where people were killed. He raises questions about the white helmets and the other people in the vicinity who supplied the video footage. And the questions remain about how first responders were able to treat the victims without putting on hazmat suits. If it really was sarin, they would be dead. And so I encourage you to read this. It's about 15 pages long. And I think that it really refutes the work of the New York Times in trying to prop up the claims of the Trump White House. And this parrots the episode in Ghouta outside Damascus a few years ago, where we are told that Syria crossed Obama's red line by using a chemical weapon, and it clearly appears that that was a concocted event, a false flag, attempting to get Obama to cross that red line. And today, in the Washington Post, there is a troubling report that the U.S. coalition in Iraq and Syria appears to have used white phosphorus-loaded munitions on at least 2 occasions in densely populated areas of Mosul in Iraq and in Raqqa in Syria. Now, I've raised this issue time and again. On both the first and second assaults of Fallujah since we invaded Iraq in 2003, white phosphorus was used. Soldiers refer to dropping white phosphorus in weaponized form in order to cause fires and kill people as shake and bake. And so here we have gross hypocrisy by the United States. Now, I must hasten to add that this is based on video footage from a behind-the-lines rebel group, and we can't be 100% sure that what the video purports to display is both accurate in terms of geography and time. But the Post report is pretty strong. There are pictures of M777 howitzers in Syria with a pallet of white phosphorus munitions sitting right next to the cannon? And where's the outrage? Will we hear from any elected officials denouncing the United States for using chemical weapons, particularly in ways that can harm civilian populations that are hunkered down in Mosul and in Raqqa behind Islamic State lines? I wish I had answers to those questions. And as I wrap up today, I want to share some comments on my experience in jury duty this week here in Marin County, California. The case that was brought before us was an interesting one. A man was accused of evading police in a lengthy chase. He was on a 1,000cc motorcycle, and the defense version of events was that Mr. Tarpley, or Talley was his name, that he initially was trying to get away from a Dodge Charger that he had a brush with in the on-ramp when he was getting on the freeway. And this caused the defendant, we were told, to speed up and to try to get away from this guy. And when his high speeds drew the attention of a local highway patrolman, he continued to speed and initially stayed in front of the highway patrol car, but then, according to his testimony, he thought that the highway patrolman had not picked up this threat to him, the Dodge Charger, and so he then sped away. And he continued for almost half an hour at speeds that ranged up to 150 miles an hour. It was amazing. And I mean, this guy rode his motorcycle so skillfully. It was quite impressive. Now, one of the things that I learned from this case is that the dash cam video cameras that so many of us argued in favor of, body cams for police officers, we see these as evidence that can be used to protect us from bad cops and bad cop behavior. These same tools were central to the conviction that the jury returned in this case, because the video evidence was so strong that this guy had an opportunity to stop, talk to the police officer, and explain why, he had been rushing away from this incident. And instead, he ran a red light, jumped onto a bridge, headed across the bay toward Oakland, and drove at speeds up to 150 miles an hour, so fast that the highway patrol helicopter could not keep up with him at times. Now, he managed to go about 60 miles in less than 30 minutes. That's an average speed of 120. That's a little over the limit. And while I was sympathetic to his explanation, and while I strongly believed that the district attorney didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this man intended to evade the police, and that's the language of the statute that was at issue here, I had to concede to my fellow jurors that at some point he did make the decision to evade the police. Now, what I also learned is that both the prosecutor and the public defender in this case did a lousy job. In the jury room, we kept scratching our heads saying, why didn't they ask this question? Why didn't they answer this question? Why didn't they tell us about this or that? And maybe you've had the same experience as a juror. You do get testimony in the courtroom and you get evidence, but you're left in the dark about so many issues. And you're told, for example, we were not allowed to read the part of the vehicle code related to the felony violation or a misdemeanor violation. And it hampered our ability in the jury room to try to assign a lesser conviction than the felony conviction that we essentially had no choice to adopt. And it pains me that the law is written so tightly that it doesn't allow for an incident like this, where whether my fellow jurors believed him or not, the defendant testified that he feared for his life, and that's why he ran. there really wasn't enough wiggle room in the law to entertain his explanation. And my final observation is, wow, do we have young highway patrol officers here in California? My impression was that the CHP was filled with middle-aged and older people who've been there for a long time. They get good pay and good pensions, and it's less risky than, policing in an urban area, for example. But the average level of experience of the 4 officers who testified in the courtroom was 3 years. I found that revealing. So that's my report on jury duty. We're back into our regular production schedule here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. I hope to have some in-depth interviews for you next week, and we'll plan to do a Facebook Live video feed next Friday. Thanks for listening. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then.